Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with another Texan boat builder, a man who has been building skiffs since the early days, a man whose attention to detail is represented perfectly through Proline aluminum and NewWater boats. This is my conversation with Tim Clancey. Well, with that being said, is there any other questions you have? Anything you want me to kind of address before we start?
I don't think so. That's rock and roll. Yes,
yeah.
sir.
All right, let's do it. So I got Mr. Tim Clancey in the chair today, and I've been trying to get this one for a while. I'm so glad we finally did it, or we're about to do it. And with that being said, if you just want to introduce yourself, and then we'll start with the beginning.
Hello, Andre. Well, I want to thank you for your patience. I really do appreciate that, and your persistence. Thank you for that. Let me preface this by saying I don't have the gift of gab. My speech can be a little compromised, and I'm very, very boring. So if anyone's still listening at the 10-minute mark, it might be my mom, and that could be it. But my name is Tim Clancey. I was born in San Antonio in June 8th of 1959. I'm 65 years old. I'm one of 6 children. I grew up in a Catholic household. My father worked for Southern Pacific Railroad with some entrepreneurial interests. My dad always had some entrepreneurial stuff going on. My mother, she was a court reporter for many years and then went back to school and became a legal assistant for a very prominent attorney in San Antonio. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Leslie. I have 3 boys, Tyler, Tristan, and Will. One beautiful daughter, Aubrey. I have 3 grandchildren, Crew, Finley, and Maris. You know, and to really understand my life or this business and this and that, I have to go way back.
Please do.
To talk about NewWater Boat Works. Proline Custom Aluminum came before NewWater Boat Works. I have to go back to my childhood, and I've just always been a nutty for the outdoors. I mean, still today, everybody's inside in the air conditioning. It's 110 degrees, and I'm outside, and that's just that's kind of my happy place. And so, that sort of sets the stage for the rest of my life. Since you asked me to do this, I got to thinking, what's made me so nutty about boats? Where in the hell did the boat thing come from? And as crazy as it sounds, I remember vividly watching the TV program Flipper. Flipper, besides watching Westerns, I loved Flipper. And I remember this kid, he had a little semi-V, kind of a Lone Star, kind of a 12-foot boat. And it was a tiller skiff. And I think it had a little Mercury on it. But I'll never forget watching this kid run around in what appeared to be maybe the upper Keys, around Key Largo, maybe something like that. And so that made a real strong impression on me, was Flipper, watching that Flipper program. And, since then, at a very young age, I remember having a piece of paneling, plywood. And I remember had it in the pasture and played on it all the time with an old engine off of a lawnmower. My dad probably replaced the lawnmower engine at some point, and I confiscated it. And that was my outboard motor. That was on the back of that piece of plywood. And, buddy, I went all over the place with that thing and whatnot. So, obviously, I've just kind of been nutty about boats. My uncle was in the Coast Guard, and he got out and had a boat. So my dad would take me with him on that boat and this and that. And we've spent a lot of time in Rockport, and I think mainly because, obviously we loved it, but my grandfather was a commercial fisherman. And for the haters out there, hey, this goes way back.
There's no hate here.
I'm 65 years old, and so my grandpa was a commercial fisherman. And I say Rockport, he actually lived between Rockport and Aransas Pass. And of all the time I remember spending at my grandpa's place, I never, ever once saw a piece of gill net. My grandfather truly was a rod and reel fisherman. He trot lined a lot, but he also cast net mullet a lot. To this day, I try to cast a net as big as him and his, and I could never do it. It's kind of net you'd hold in your teeth to throw it. Some of the old timers probably would probably still do that. But anyway, so my grandpa spent a ton of time with him in Rockport. And when we would go down We didn't own a boat, but my dad owned a Wizard Powermatic 12. It's an outboard.
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself prepping for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a shout.
Motor. In fact, I have one today. I'm putting in my barn at home because it's such great memories for me. But we had this Wizard Powermatic 12, and my dad would go to Blevins Harbor on Aransas Bay and rent little aluminum boats. But then also too would go to Redfish Camp, which has been kind of wiped out by Harvey. But Redfish Camp had these little wooden dories that my dad would rent. And my dad and I would go out in Port and Copano Bay a bunch on these little dories with that little 12 horsepower Powermatic outboard motor. But then I tell you, I had something else happen that was just, I'm going to say life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
My dad took the time when I was probably 8 or 9 years old to build a boat with me, for me. We built it together. And to this day, I can walk into a lumber yard, and when I smell that lumber, I tell you, depending on the kind of day I'm having, it can just, it hits me right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know it made a great, great impact on me. It was building that wooden boat with my dad. And since then, I think we bought an old scooter that had a rotted deck, and we took on that refit project and so on and so forth. But that was a big deal for me. And then, like I said, my dad worked for the railroad, but he was always thinking about businesses and this and that. And probably because his dad owned a painting contracting business, I think it's a fairly large company. So my dad was kind of brought up around self-employment and this and that. And so my dad came to us one day and said, "You know what? I think I want to open up a go-kart. You know what go-kart is? A go-kart rental track." And we didn't have any money to speak of, and he convinced a shopping mall in San Antonio to lease him some land right on the expressway to open up the go-kart track.
Jesus. What year was this?
I was probably 9 or 10 years old, so that would have been in about 68, 1968.
So you were excited to get that done.
Oh, my God. But, the lessons that came from that, hard work, one of them, because we did all this ourselves. We didn't have any money.
Hands-on.
Yes, sir. I can remember digging the holes and building the fence, which we did a lot on the ranch. So, I kind of came up with some of that stuff. But building the fence, we built a building to house all this stuff in. But probably the biggest lesson I learned then, besides seat time in the go-karts, was we bought these fun carts and transformed them into rental carts. The rental cart may have cost $1,000, and the fun cart you could buy for $300.
Huh.
So being on a strict budget, we bought the fun carts. And my uncle knew a little about welding and this and that, so we did all this fabrication to transform these $300 go-karts into some safe rental cart with Nerf bars and bumpers and roll cages and all that stuff. So that was
okay. So a lot of the welding, you weren't having to mess with the engines or anything because you can't have them going fast anyways.
Roger that. Yes, sir. They all had governors. So we did all that and painted the fence and even built the track itself. He had a friend in the asphalt business and so on and so forth. So anyway, that was probably my first real job. Was after school, my mom would pick us up and we would go open up the track. And then, I'd see my dad come in there after work. I'd see him turn the corner in his 1955 F-100 blue Ford pickup, and he'd come up there and we'd open up the track, and it was business. And so, at some point we had to close the track down. We were broken into once. I think my parents absorbed that with no insurance, and then we were broken into again. Anyway, the track at some point went away. But through all that, I got a lot of seat time in these go-karts, okay? And so I always loved to go fast. And my dad had a friend named George Ackerman, whose son, Scooter Ackerman, raced these go-karts. And Scooter was a hot shoe. He was the man to beat and so on and so forth. And so my dad, George, found a used go-kart, and we fixed it up and started going to the track. And this and that, and I didn't know how life-changing going to the track was going to be for me. And you'll realize later, because we made some friends that just wound up being lifelong friends to me. Robert Andrews, who is now my brother-in-law, Bobby Andrews, David Moffat, George Ackerman, obviously, Wayne Buchanan, who became like a father to me, and his two sons, Gary and Alan. But learned a lot at the racetrack. Got pretty fast. Learned how to really work towards a goal. A lot of development changes, going back and forth to the track, chassis improvements and tire compounds and all that fun stuff.
These are lessons while you were, but this was already after when you were racing?
It is, yes.
But you didn't have the track anymore. So
No, did not have the track. This was in the early 70s. I was probably 11, 12 years old, yes, that my dad bought this cart for me, and he and I started doing this together. And my dad was, I'm not going to say he was a workaholic, but my dad worked a lot. And so for him to take the time to build a boat, or for me to see the paint in my garage where he had bought an old used mini bike and repainted it so it was a Christmas gift for me, stuff like that hit right here. I mean, it hit me hard and just showed me the kind of love that...
Where were you racing when you started trying to get good at go-karting?
When we started, we had a sprint track on O'Connor Road in San Antonio. So it was on the northeast side of San Antonio. It was a 0.4 of a mile track. And these sprint tracks, you set up in them. And, even as a junior, you're going 60, 70 miles an hour in these things. So, I mean, they're not really toys. I mean, you can sure enough get hurt in these things. But that's where it started, was at these sprint tracks, which later in life, I mean, I got very, very into it later in life, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit. But, another life-changing event then came not terribly long after that. And what that was when I was 13, my dad died of a massive heart attack. And, I mean, that really hit my family hard. My mom, obviously, she's left there with 6 kids to raise. That's when she went back to school and took this job outside the home for an attorney there in San Antonio. And so not long, maybe a year or so after my dad died, my mom came to us kids and she said, "What do you guys think of us buying our own place in Rockport?" Of course, we did backflips. Are you kidding me? Our own house down there? And so yeah, we ended up going through the whole process and looking at houses and this and that. And we ended up buying a home in Rockport and spent just a lot of weekends there. My grandfather spent more time with me then, I think, after losing my dad. He and I fished a bunch together. And my grandfather, he just really, he's where my fishing foundation came from. What I remember most vividly was my grandpa. And before my grandpa, obviously I grew up fishing the lights on the piers. I love free shrimping with lots. We have free shrimping, catching them trout. And so I remember that vividly because I remember shrimp, it seemed like cost 3 cents a piece at the time.
3 cents a piece.
3 cents a piece. And we had this big old pecan tree. And I knew if I tracked a full-size jar of pecans, there was a candy store that would give me 25 cents for that big jar of tracked pecans. And that would get me, 8 shrimp. It would get me 8 shrimp. And so I remember that vividly. So I loved to free shrimp under the lights. But with my grandpa, what I remember the most was we would go out in his, I'm going to call it a net skiff, because I still call him net skiff today. While he wasn't a net skiff, N-E-T skiff. While he wasn't a netter, this was the kind of boats that he ran. They were wooden. And technically, today, they would be called a dory, D-O-R-Y. Really? So you would have this wooden pointed dory with a 18-horse Johnson on it, an outboard motor, always a tiller boat. But my most vivid memories with him, besides him cussing about the snowbirds following him to his fishing spots, I remember him, what we would do is we would go out first light and we would ride and reel fish. We would ride and reel fish until, I'm going to say 10 o'clock. And then we would go run his trot lines. And he did have a lot of trot lines. And trot lines, most people, I've been around a while, so
If you're enjoying this episode or any others and want to support the project, please check out my new book, Laguna, available at select stores or can be ordered directly at buylagunabook.myshopify.com.
You have to know this bay was the flats. I mean, it had a lot of trot lines in it. So,
I've heard that you couldn't drive at night because you would be risking running into trot lines.
It was a hazard to navigation.
Yeah, I even heard that in the lower Laguna Madre, it got so bad to the point where when ducks would pass over the water, they'd get stuck on one, like the indicators of the lines or not indicators, the lines that would go across, and it was like. I can't imagine. It's crazy.
It is. It really was crazy. And so something else was really crazy about this was you have the main line up above the water, maybe 1.5 feet, okay? And then you would have what we call stagings that would hang down off of that main line that may have been 2 foot long. But we didn't use bait. What he used was surveyor's ribbon.
Surveyor's
ribbon. You know, the orange tape that you see. You know, when you survey
of course.
real estate or this or that, he used surveyor's ribbons on these things. And so what we do is we'd rod and reel fish till about 9 or 10, then we'd go run the trot lines, and then of course we'd gut and gill these fish. And you know, by the age of 13, buddy, I could gut and gill fish now. Let me tell you. and he'd sell them and this and that. But the other thing we did that I loved and still love today is we winter fished a lot together. Totally different area than where his trot laning was done and where he and I would rod and reel fish. We would winter fish with humps, bingos, mirror lures, a lot of mirror lure fishing, a lot of hump and bingo fishing, but mainly mirror lures, which is like today's
DOA or
no, not necessarily
okay.
A horsey. Like, and we worm fished a lot. And when I still call it worm fishing because I still worm fish a lot today. But you didn't go out and buy soft plastics. What he did was he would buy these long worms and cut them up into small pieces. So it may be 8, 10, 12 inches long. They would bass fish with them. And he cut them up into small pieces. A lot of the old timers will remember this and I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of it, but our wintertime fishing for trout, I loved it. I loved doing that, still do today. And then of course, just a lot of worm fishing. Great memories of doing all that. But you know, after that, I can remember one thing that was really memorable for me. Another little story was that boat that my dad and I built. My mom called it Little Boat Blue because we painted it blue. And, you know, some of the old timers on here will remember a TV program called, I think it was a long trailer with Lucille Ball in it.
A long trailer.
Yeah, my wife was watching this the other night, and it reminded me of the time that my mother and myself and my 2 sisters were driving to Rockport in our 1961 Pontiac or whatever it was, and we had this blue boat on top of the car, tying it down. And I mean, you can imagine me. I mean, I'm about 14 years old or something with this boat tied down. You can imagine my knot tying. But here's me and my mom and my 2 younger sisters trying to hold this boat down for 140-mile trip to Rockport with this little boat. But yeah, it was nasty. But anyway, we get there, and that boat was developed for a 12-volt trolling motor. It was never meant to have a
motor in general,
a propulsion engine on it. Well, I'd saved my money and bought a 7.5 horse Elgin. I think it was an Elgin, and I put it on that boat that was meant for a 12-volt troll motor, and obviously it wasn't good. The boat has a vertical transom. Okay. It wasn't angled. Like typically, you know, you'd see 12 degree plus as a transom angle in a boat. And so it was vertical. So I put this motor on there. It meant I had extreme positive trim. The problem with that, when I got on this boat for the first time, it jumped up on plane. But it porpoised violently. So violently, I hit a boat dock.
Really?
And I crashed my little blue boat. But, you know, we could talk for hours about all the bullets that I have dodged. That was probably the first major bullet that I dodged, hitting the dock in that little blue boat. You know, so we're rocking along there, and I'm probably 15 or so now. And so my mother remarried. And she married a guy who, bless his heart, I loved him to death. His name was Bill Bryant. Bill, he met this family. He met me with a lot of resistance. He really did.
Interesting.
Well, nobody was good enough for my mom, but more importantly, nobody should replace my dad.
Of
Probably
course.
pretty typical deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
For a second, I thought you meant he came into it with resistance. I was like, that's pretty silly.
Yeah.
No, but obviously, you guys makes a little difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was a hard-headed kid and this and that, and so, but he was a fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
And he offshore fished, which was something I knew nothing about.
He had his own boat?
Had his own boat.
Oof.
And he knew nothing about bay fishing. And then I did. So we kind of had that commonality. I showed him the bay stuff, and he exposed me to offshore fishing.
Do you remember what kind of hole he had for the offshore stuff?
I do. He had an 18-foot manatee, just like the manatees on the East Coast. He had 18-foot manatees, kind of an ugly mustard color with a 115 Johnson on it. And we fished the hell out of that, but we chain fished it, we'd stay within 12, 15 miles of the beach. But, oh my God, that offshore stuff lit me up.
I can imagine.
I mean, it lit me up.
Did you jump your first tarpon on that boat?
Did not jump my first tarpon, but caught tons of kingfish. There's a picture of him in the hall on the front cover
With that big kingfish?
Of the South Jetty in Port Aransas with a 56-pound kingfish. And so, long story short, I mean, we had that, and he started helping me some with the racing. He would haul me to different engine shops and all this sort of stuff.
He was also into that kind of stuff,
Not really
or he was just
into
doing it to kind of get brownie points and stuff like that. Okay.
It was a brownie point deal for sure. It was a brownie point deal. My dad was a motorhead. Bill wasn't a motorhead,
Gotcha.
but a wonderful, wonderful man. We had great times fishing together, and he wound up. Knew nothing about lure fishing, didn't believe in them. He believed them when we were done. He loved it. He craved it. And so that was great. But it exposed me as a young man to the offshore stuff. And since that's been a big part of my life, not as much as I would like it to have been. But as you know, Andre, that offshore game, but it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle. But it led me to some different boats that I became passionate about.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a boat called the Merit. It's built in Pompano Beach. There's a boat called the Rybovich. And the Merit and Rybovich boats just have inspired me all my life.
What aspect inspired you? Like the craftsmanship, the technology. Like that's interesting.
The technology, the craftsmanship, the beauty, the sea keeping, just the systems, the owners, just the principles of the town, all of it, just everything about them. Yeah, I mean, some of the Carolina boats I'm okay with, more so now than I was back in the day, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, the whole offshore game, just I loved it. And of course, I had to go further and farther, and so, he would get bigger boats. I would be involved in them, and I started bill fishing these boats. I mean, you start out fishing the Hospital Rock outside of Port Aransas, and best I remember it, 34 nautical miles, which for me in the day, that was a stretch, And then you go to Aransas, and then you go to Southern, then Dutra, then, you finally get to the breaks. And, this was back in the day. I mean, these were single engine outboards that were doing this and whatnot. So, yeah, that was a big deal, but just a lot of knowledge came from that and the bigger boats and so on and so forth. So ended up, doing some tournament fishing with that. And Bill, in July of 95, see how old was I then? In July of 95, Bill and I were fishing in South Bay in Aransas Pass Rockport. Not the South Bay.
Yeah, not South Bay, but I know.
He and I were fishing South Bay, and I was pulling him around in a John boat, and it was flicked off that morning.
We were using a pole.
Fiberglass push pole.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure.
Yes, sir. Pulling him around in South Bay. The water was flicked off that morning. It was July. It wasn't a breath of wind, and these fish were all showing themselves, okay? Fish were all showing themselves, and we were using a topwater. He was using a topwater stick bait and just whacking them. I mean, we were just really whacking them. He was really catching them. Long story short, he started developing a pain, and within an hour, I had him to the boat ramp at Con Brown Harbor, and he was very uncomfortable. I said, Bill, I'm going to run get the truck, back it down. I'm on my way to the truck, and I hear splash. And I turn around, he had fallen in the water. He had passed out. And I went and I dragged him out of the water down the boat ramp. And long story short, he died that night at Spawn Hospital of an aortic aneurysm.
An aneurysm.
Yes, an aneurysm, and it's just another one of those, wow, kind of a deals. But I don't know why I'm even talking about this other than just such a big deal in my life. But,
which is important. This is your life we're talking about.
Yeah, and anyway, since then, his son and I mean, we're very, very close. Andy, my stepbrother, we fish together still today. But that was just a big deal, losing Bill in such a way, doing what he loved to do. But nevertheless, and I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. Back when I was about 14 years old, another job I took was working at a chainsaw shop in San Antonio.
Like making chainsaws, or
No.
cutting like big pieces of wood and lumber, stuff like that?
Servicing chainsaws, rebuilding engines.
Neither.
I had been racing these go karts all my life, so I'd gotten pretty good at building these engines. And the guy who owned the chainsaw shop raced, and he wanted me to build his motors. So I would ride a bus across town, I remember, to his chainsaw shop, and worked there for quite a while. And after that, another job I took that I think had a lot to do with what I do today. One of the boats that Bill had was a center console Tobia, and I remember he had a bottom failure or something in the boat, and he took it to a place called Red Hamilton Marine. Red Hamilton Marine gave me a job, and I remember I was 15 because I couldn't drive yet, and I was on every work program there was in school. I mean, I like to work. For lack of a better term.
Noted for sure.
Well, but I went to work for this Red Hamilton Marine, and obviously, to start out, I was somewhat of a grunt. I mean, I can remember grinding lots of fiberglass. But I remember I was 15 because I couldn't drive a car yet, but I could buy a motorcycle at 15 and ride a motorcycle at 15. And I remember riding this motorcycle home in 30-degree weather with my shirt open because I was so ate up with fiberglass. I wasn't used to it yet. But long story short, I learned a lot there. I learned the basics of composites. I learned how to build patterns or plugs. We know them as in the industry as plugs. A plug is a pattern that you'll use to create a mold to reproduce it in composite, okay? And so I learned to build patterns there. I learned how to apply gel coating, mold coatings. I learned how to build composite parts. I learned what cord structures were all about. Back then it was wood. Still a lot of people use wood today as a core material. A very high-tech core back in the day would have been balsa wood. Balsa is still a great core used properly. So I learned all that stuff at a really, really young age. And sometime in there, my brother-in-law, Robert Andrews, exposed me to these road race go-karts. And these road race go-karts, I mean, badass. Just badass. You lay down.
What was different?
You lay down in them, and they're very, very low resistance, and they're super fast.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean now.
You lay down in these cars, and they have bodywork on them. And so what that means is a very, very low drag coefficient. And they're very low horsepower motors. I mean, 100cc engine, two-stroke engine. And so the only reason I bring this up is because a lot of what I learned that air does over the bodywork and under the bodywork, it's the same water does over a boat hull.
Yeah, water and air are both fluids.
You bet. That's exactly right. And so I got really into this. And the reason I brought those people up earlier in my sprint kart racing days is because they helped me so much get into the road racing. And so that became a big part of my life, and I learned a lot about that, got into the aerodynamics of them. This helped me a lot with the tunnel design on my first boat. My first boat, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but my first boat, you go to all these naval architects and you talk to them, and there's not a lot of prior art about tunnels. There's some prop pockets that we put in these inboard boats, primarily to minimize shaft angle, to minimize shaft angle in an inboard boat, you'll put a prop tunnel in it so you can lower the engine, raise the prop, also for shoal draft to make them shallower performing. But wasn't a lot out there. So I had some, particularly one guy that was an aero guy that had a lot of aerodynamic knowledge. He helped me a lot with the tunnel design and the bodywork design on these little road racing go-karts, how you would tunnel air up under them, how you would very efficiently get air above the bodywork and this and that. So this road racing stuff, I mean, I really took to it. I kind of got ate up with it for a while. I did it on a national level. My cars were very, very extreme.
Did your cars have names?
No, they didn't have names. I typically would call them by the color. But, there again, kid, no money. I mean, on a real strict budget. So I fabricated a lot of stuff. At the end of my road racing career, my cars were so extreme, I couldn't just throw anybody in it to drive the car because it would have a remote expansion chamber. You should adjust the conversion tone on the expansion chamber on the steering wheel. So low RPMs, you'd have a longer pipe, then a shorter pipe at higher RPMs. I had a remote carburetor tuner on the steering wheel. Well, you should adjust the fuel air mixture all the way around the track. You'd have a richer mixture at low speed. You'd have a leaner mixture at high speed. I would have chassis components that were adjustable. I should stiffen up the car. I should change the ride height. I should do different things. And so what that taught me was how to just really work hard to make something better. I would do a lot of testing. I remember when we were racing on a national level, and I had some help by then. I had some sponsors, and I had my good friend David Moffat, who was an extremely brilliant man, who was somewhat of my engine tuner. We got a sponsorship by a company called Pi System. It was in Formula One. It was in IndyCar, but it was brand new in karting. And so Pi System gave us this data logging technology to put on our car. What that meant was if we had two cars and we had rented, say, Elkhart Lake, say, Texas World Speedway, Hallett Motor Raceway, Oak Hill Raceway, you would go to this track, you would go out and do laps, you would come in, download it in your computer, and David would analyze all this data. And the reason I'm talking about all this is because it played a part in some of this crazy boat stuff that I've done, in my lifetime. I don't want to say that our boats are extreme, but our boats aren't for everybody. They're for someone who wants extreme performance. You don't take your Formula One car to the grocery store.
That's exactly what you told me. In Houston, you said it was a very niche, boats are a niche, something like that. I was like, I get it. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's where a lot of kind of what I've done has come from. It's just thinking outside the box. Not that that's always the best way, but it was just kind of what I've done.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, that was kind of part of that. And so by about the age of 16, I left the fiberglass shop, and there was a dealership in San Antonio called Randall Marine. And Randall Marine hired me to...
Were you done with the go-karting at this point?
I was not. No,
okay, I just want to make sure.
I was not. Yep. I got out of it for a while, but I was not. At this point, Randall Marine hired me to be a rigger. And what a rigger is back in the day, a dealership would buy a boat hull, but it was just a boat hull. It might have the steering in it, but it didn't have the engine, didn't have the gauges, didn't have the trailer, didn't have the motor. So it was my job to rig these boats.
To run the wires.
You bet. Yeah, that's exactly right. Pardon me, I'm very dry. I have to drink to talk, but
no worries.
But while at Randall, we were an Invader dealer. We sold Terry Bass boats and aluminum boats. We sold Aquasport. We were a Johnson dealer. I learned a ton there about outboard motors and about boats in general. But probably the biggest relevance to that job and what I do today. While I was working for Randall Marine, who was owned by Ernest Randall, who was another major staple in my life, Ernest Randall, he was a great guy, very smart, very creative. He had a subsidiary called City Marine Propeller Service.
Mm-hmm.
City Marine Propeller Service was another way for him to generate revenue. We built boat propellers. And not necessarily built them, we rebuilt them. Well, he had a gentleman in there much older than me that wanted to retire. So Ernest came to me and he said, Tim, I want you to learn how to do this TIG welding. I want you to learn how to do this propeller repair. And so I took right to it. I'd done welding on the ranch, and I had the metal shop class in school and all that sort of stuff. And so I took this position he offered me there for City Marine Propeller Service. And I bring it up because Ernest was kind enough to let me use the shop on my own time. And so I started building. I think the first fabricated item I built was for Ernest's nephew. It was a competition water skier. I built him a Ceto bar on his Hydrodyne.
Huh.
And then I built one on a 17-foot Aqua Sport center console, if you can believe it or not. Long story short, I started doing more and more fabrication in the prop shop. So I got really good at rebuilding props. We were a Michigan licensed propeller repair station, so we had all the pitch blocks. I did a lot of shade repair and stuff like that. A lot of changing of pitch and propellers, adding cups to propellers, and all this sort of stuff. But over and above all of that, I started doing fabrication. Ernest kind of saw some of that, so he let me do some of that commercially. We would build some boat rails. We repaired a lot of aluminum boats. But probably one of the most important things that really stands out to me is I wanted an airboat. I know, and haters don't hate me.
Ain't nobody hating, but I was crazy. I was not expecting that.
Yes, and I probably will regret saying this.
No, you won't.
But building this airboat for me, I'm 16 years old, and so what that told me, and thinking back about my life, was that I have always loved lonely places. Mm-hmm. And by that I mean I love to get remote. And so building that airboat would get me to some spots that I couldn't get to in my Chiller John boat back in the day. I deer hunted out of my airboat. Obviously, I was big into duck hunting. But building that airboat, I learned a ton. It was really cool. And I'm not a big proponent of airboats. Believe me, I'm not.
I don't see a NewWater airboat around here.
No, that's right. Thank you for that. But I did. He let me build that, and I was just very, very appreciative of that. And so, most of my weekends were spent on the ranch in Rockport, obviously at one of these races. I've had horses all my life, so, I spent a lot of time doing that. But Ernest really trusting me with the shop and getting to do stuff on my own gave me a really great knowledge of fabrication and, and whatnot. And so probably about 77 or 78, I was spending most of my weekends in Rockport and really on Copano Bay, because our house was on Copano Bay, and I was really an avid duck hunter. Most of the duck blinds on Copano Bay were mine or my buddies, and I had this good friend of mine named Stan Crabtree. Stan and I rodeoed together, and we also hunted and fished together. And so Stan ended up dating a girl in Rockport. And there again, 77, 78, so I'm 18 years old, something like that. Stan's girlfriend, her name was Lori Horton, and her dad, Eugene Horton, became a very good friend of mine. And I think the reason being, when we were over there, and Stan and I were always together, so when Stan was with Lori, hell, what was I doing? Sitting on the couch watching TV or talking to Skeet. Mm-hmm. And long story short, Skeet Horton came to me there again in probably 77 or 78, and he said, Tim, he worked for Perry Bass, the Bass family from Fort Worth, and so he worked for the oil company, which was Bass Enterprises. Well, the oil company, it was on the mainland side of Aransas Bay. So Skeet went to the island every day. He went over to San Jose, as you know it today. I knew it as St. Joe as a young man. And so St. Joe Island, just a little background, it runs from the Port Aransas North Jetty plumb to Cedar Bayou. It's roughly 18 miles long, and it's 4 miles wide at its widest point. It's a working ranch. When I was there, we had roughly 1,200 mama cows. And so Steve came to me one evening. He said, Tim, he said, all your hunting and fishing and this and that. He said, I heard John saying they're looking for somebody to help Mr. Bass with the hunting and fishing. And so I said, yes, okay. He said, I want you to meet John and just talk to him about that. You've been talking about maybe moving down here and this and that. And okay. And of course, I'm a young kid, no confidence and this and that. Yeah, let's visit. So I met Mr. Keicher, John Keicher, who became like a father to me. I met him, and he said, Tim, he said, I want you to talk to Mr. Bass. So he set this meeting up with me and Perry Bass, which, of course, I didn't know that much about Perry Bass like I do now. I'm like, oh, my God, really? Me meet Mr. Bass? So anyway, I did, and we talked, and we met. And I'll be damned if I didn't get a job as the fishing game guy for San Jose Island.
Really?
And just huge. I mean, this was a major, major, major event in my life. I wish all of my sons should have the same job that I have. It was unbelievable, the things that I got to do working for Mr. Bass, the things that they let me do. The things
being able to work out there back then, I can only imagine.
Andre, we should talk for hours about the adventures. If I'd have had picture phones back then, 18 miles long, 4 miles wide, they taught me how to fly a little 172 Cessna. I would fly the island every other day after lunch. I'd go jump in it and fly the island. I got to log time in 45, 50-foot boats, towing our barge across the bay. They had cattle trailers on it, had fuel trucks on it. So I logged a bunch of time in their big boat. So it enabled me to go get my 50-ton ocean operator's license. Dog training. They sent me up to the guy who did all their dog stuff. So I spent a lot of time with him learning how to maintain our dogs. Obviously, I was a cowboy, so I got to work cows and this and that. But, oh, my God, the adventures. In fact, one adventure I had with tarpon in the surf, I wasn't a surf fisherman. In fact, I didn't like surf fishing. When I came to work there, I learned to love the surf. What a dummy I was. But we should talk for hours about the adventures. And I think the main reason I brought that up is just all the knowledge that I gained there while I was working for Mr. Bass.
I can't imagine that much. It's almost like it's not freedom, right? You're still an employee, but damn near.
Andre, unbelievable. At some point, they would even let me take my horse to town to go to a calf roping. That's crazy. On the barge. With a 50-foot steel whole boat. Of course, we'd have other reasons to take him to town too, wink, wink. But no, I'm not trying to get mine in trouble. But I got treated so well there. I loved it there. I love John Keicher to this day. He became like a second father to me. He and I both loved old country music, so I would go to his house in the evening from the bunkhouse. I would have to stay over there weeks at a time, okay? When Mr. Bass was down, we had a party there, and it was my responsibility to quail hunt this party, to fish this party.
To outfit the party.
To entertain this party, exactly, to outfit this party. That was my responsibility. And there are some things I can't even talk about on that island because it's just, it's not my position to do. But I was responsible for a lot of very, very valuable things. And yeah, I mean, as a young kid to have that kind of responsibility was just life-changing for me. And I'm so appreciative of it. I mean, just so appreciative of it. And Mr. Bass was a very, very wonderful man to work for. His oldest son, Sid, treated me like you and me sitting right here. I mean, he'd get off the airplane and would talk just like you and I are talking. And just a great guy, great family. I didn't know Lee, Ed, and Robert very well. They didn't come much. Lee wasn't. Lee was the youngest. Lee was about my age probably at the time, and he didn't come to the island as much. But that was a great time. I won't spend a bunch more time on that. But at some point, John Keicher came to me, and he he said, Tim, I'm leaving the island. And I couldn't believe this. John came from a ranch background. Actually, his family were rice farmers around Beaumont. And then he went to work for Standard Truthers Breeders International. He was one of the first Standard Truthers cattle breed classifiers. And so that's how he got the job with Mr. Bass, as best I recall. But he came to me and said, Tim, I'm leaving. And man, that threw me for a loop. Because,
How long had you been working there?
Probably 5 years, 4 to 5
so
years.
it had been quite a while.
It had been 4 to 5 years. And so, of course, I'm like going, wow, what am I going to do? And I think I probably could have left with Mr. Schleicher. He went to a ranch called the 9 Bar, owned by a woman named Miss Anthony. She owned several newspapers and this and that. And they were going to get more into cutting horses. And San Jose was into cutters as well, but we had them in Pleasanton at another division. But I think John wanted to be kind of really more involved with the cutters and more the cows. John was a cowman. Mr. Bass was into whale and redfish. Big time whale and redfish. In fact, a quick story. I could hear a lot of conversation between some very high ups in this country as I was driving these people around in these hunting rigs and fishing and stuff. I remember somebody getting Mr. Bass to tell them how they wound up owning San Jose Island. Mr. Bass, as a very probably young man boy, was in the Spartina grass duck hunting, and he and Uncle Sid Richardson heard quail singing up on the island, and the rest is history.
Really?
Once he heard the quail up on the island. Yeah. Anyway, that's how the story went. That's where my love for birds came from.
Really?
But I never really. I mean, birds, yeah, they're great. But if we can't hunt them, I mean, what good are they? I do love my shorebirds.
Yeah, clearly.
From just kind of my time on the island. But anyway, John comes to me and he tells me this. And I'm like going, oh my God. I said, in a nutshell, I must have shown some interest to John to maybe someday run the ranch, be in management over there, more than just kind of in charge of what I was in charge of. And in a nutshell, I remember him saying something to the effect of, if you don't have a degree from A&M, I'm afraid, Tim, you'll never get that job.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I remember coming away with that thought, okay? Not that he said that per se.
Like verbatim, but it was insinuated, yeah.
I think so, Andre. I really do. I think so. And so, I probably got pretty down about them.
Do you think it was an ego thing? You think it was I had to do it, so you have to do it too?
Not at all.
Really?
No, sir. John was
so
not.
You thought it was more so like who was deciding if you got the job or if you got to take a leadership role and stuff like that?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it was probably Mr. Bass.
Okay.
And I was young.
So it was a preference then from his part.
I was young. I had some college courses, but I did not have a degree.
Yeah.
I did not, and so for me to go back to college at that point, that would have been just like a major deal. And I suppose I could have approached Mr. Bass at that point and say, hey, here's my goal. What will it, if I'm a candidate, what would it take for me to get there? I didn't do that.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah. And so I didn't do that. But I had about that time, I stayed for a little while. I stayed for a little while after that, but it just wasn't the same. I was missing John.
Yeah.
New management was cool, but it was new management, and I was a young guy.
Yeah.
And by young guy, I mean I stayed over there for weeks at a time, okay? And so I had other interests in town, if you know what I mean. So, on that island, that fog oftentimes is just rolling off them sand dunes at 4 p.m.
Yeah.
I'd be looking across the dim lights of town going away going, damn. Anyway. Enough of that. So, I had other interests, but when I was on the island, you'd have to work for weeks at a time. And so what that meant was if we were working cows, if I had a party, I would be over there and staying over there in the bunkhouse. But that gave me time in my off time. I would have days off, like sometimes a week at a time. And so I lived on a canal on Copano Bay. I set up a shop under my house. I set up a shop. And so what that means in my off time, I did boat work. I started doing T-tops I started doing polling platforms. I was still offshore fishing, so I put a tuna tower on my mom's outboard boat because I love to bill fish. So I started doing that fabrication under my house there. I remember I built Mr. Bass. We built an aluminum boat while I was there, and I shouldn't say we built. Larry Pierce built this 31-foot aluminum boat that we launched in the surf. We launched it in the surf.
Jesus Christ.
We could talk for hours about our surf fishing, but we had this boat. I would run it outside. We anchored it in the surf. But long story short, I did all the fabrication. I built the T-top, the rails, the platforms, the fuel tank, and all that sort of stuff. So I was doing a lot of fabrication back then under my house in Rockport. Okay, and so about the time I said, okay, I'm going to leave the island. I don't think this is where I need to be.
How many years after John left did you make that decision?
Less than a year.
Oh, okay. So it was, okay.
Yes,
okay.
yeah. Obviously, that was a very tough decision for me, but I had met a gentleman named Pat Eccles. And Pat Eccles has been a lifelong friend of mine. Pat was a young degree guy who worked for Randall Marine because he was dating Ernest Randall's daughter. He was their outboard motor technician. Pat wound up in management at what now is a very large company in San Antonio called Aero Glass Company, which morphed into Aero Wall. Long story short, Pat and I kept in touch. We still fished together some, and we talked about the resource down there and what was going on in the fishery. And so Pat said, you know, Tim, he said, I know this is probably not what you want to do. He says, but we've got these 2 6-story buildings, and we're, you know, they did curtain walls. So he put all glass on them. He said, I need a fabricator. Come up here and be a fabricator for me. So I did. I moved back up to this area, and I was a fabricator in the field for him, welding, and I wound up running a crew for him and doing these clips on these big buildings to put all this glass on these buildings.
Yeah.
And long story short, Pat came to me probably not 3 or 4 months after I had been there and said, Tim, Mr. Morris wants to meet with you. That was the owner of the company. And so he calls me in the office, and they offered me a project management job for that company. And I was like, well, do I really deserve that? I'm not sure I'm qualified, blah, blah, blah. Great opportunity. I mean, just a major opportunity. So I took that job in project management. They gave me a couple of my own big buildings to do. And so I worked for them for a little while, which I'm very thankful, Pat. Thank you so much for the opportunity. But I had really felt this self-employment gig desire gnawing at me, nagging at me. I mean,
you couldn't work for someone else.
Well, I'm not going to say couldn't work, but
that's what you had done for most of your life, really.
Yeah, I just never really liked boundaries with regards to, man, if I'm going to work, I don't know. I guess I was kind of sort of just wanting to do other stuff, and I wasn't into construction. I wasn't into buildings. I was into the outdoors, and I was into to boats and airplanes and race cars, and it's just great opportunity. I was making good money, but I had to go to them and respectfully leave the company, and so I did. And I'd saved up a little bit of money, and in fact, I'll tell you a quick, kind of a funny story. After I left them, they ended up buying 5,000 acres in Webb County. So and I love the brush country. We could talk more about that. But anyway, kind of a quick story. But anyway, I left there. I saved up a little bit of money. So I went out and I rented me some lease space on the east side of San Antonio. And I did it, believe it or not, because I saw a niche, and you'll think I'm crazy, for an aluminum horse trailer. All aluminum horse and stock trailers. Because I wanted one, number one, and I couldn't afford it. And so I wanted one of these, but I saw a niche. There were only 2 companies building them. One was called Lightline and one was called Featherlight.
Okay.
And so, I can do that, but I can do it, I'm not going to say better, but I can do it different. I'm going to do this and that. And so I had this lease space, and I designed this trailer. I built the tooling. I built this big fancy wall.
How long did it take, the design?
Fixture. Oh, hell, 6, 8 months, maybe, something like that.
Okay.
And anyway, I ended up building my first prototype. And that's been, God, how many years ago? I still own it and pull it today. My boys pull it today. This
Really?
aluminum horse trailer I built. But long story short, the whole time, people come to find out where I was at. And they knew what I did and what my past was. So I started building tuna towers and T-tops and polling platforms and boat rails. And that's what funded my little trailer venture. Well, it wasn't long before, I've got a business here I really need to take advantage of. And so I totally shifted gears and changed paths and went into the marine fabrication. And that's why even today I advertise Proline Custom Aluminum and Canvas as the oldest marine fabricator in the state because I started Proline in 1984. But, back then, Andre, nobody knew what a T-top was.
Yeah.
Hell, polling platform in Texas?
No way.
No way. Sure, maybe in Florida.
Yeah.
We had some clamps to the back of John boats, and this and that, but that stuff was foreign here. And so, a very exciting time for me, tons of opportunity for me. Had I had more confidence and not been so fearful of debt, I've always been fearful of debt. I always tried to fund everything out of pocket and this and that. I should have really done something with this company back then. I, for whatever reason, didn't. But I was successful. I can remember back in the day, of course, we didn't have the internet. And so you had to figure everything out. Back in the day, I started this. You had to polish and buff your own aluminum. I remember polishing. I built a machine to polish this aluminum, and then I built a trailer to haul it from San Antonio to Houston to anodize it. You shouldn't buy anodized pipe. All the little fittings and stuff that you see out there in my showroom, you can buy all that stuff now. We had to machine all that stuff. You had to make all that stuff. So it was a different time. But also, there was really no competition. There was no one else doing it. I remember at my first boat show. It was at the Houston Boat Show. People would walk up to your booth, and those that knew what the stuff was they'd say, "Where do you come from in Florida? Where are you at in Florida?" I said, "Man, we're not in Florida. We're in San Antonio, Texas." Really? What's that about? Because back then, you basically had two fabricators, and they were pipe welders, and they were Salt Shaker, two companies that were, very well known, mainly in offshore stuff. They did a lot of offshore boats and this and that, and really, I mean, that was really it. But I would go to the Houston Boat Show. I went to San Antonio Boat Show, Austin Boat Show. And looking back, I should have really scaled the company. I should have opened one in the Valley. I should have opened one in Corpus, Port Aransas, one in Houston, Galveston. But, young kid, no confidence, no money. So anyway, that went on for quite a while. And that was in 1984. I started doing that sort of stuff. Well, at some point, I started going to the Miami Boat Show. And that was another life-changing event for me. Talk about country comes to town. It was country comes to town.
Kevin Shaw said a very similar thing too when he went to Florida too, and everyone was like, "Ooh."
Oh my God! I mean, just a new world for me. I started going to the Merritt Yard, the Rybovich Yard, and just, I mean, I remember probably the second year I went. The first year I went to the Miami Boat Show. This was probably in 85, 86. You won't remember this, but there was a TV program called Miami Vice with Don Johnson. Broke kid. I pull up to this place I'm staying somewhere near South Beach. I had this woman that would book for me, and she knew I didn't have any money. So I pull up to this place in a cab, a rental car, whatever. They drop me off, and there's helicopters circling behind this place I'm staying on South Beach or whatever. And I'm like, what the hell's a helicopter doing back there? So I walk, it's sitting right on the beach. So I walk back there, and there's an offshore boat race. And I'm going, wow, this is unbelievable. Just some country kid that comes to Miami, Florida, going to South Beach, and the whole Florida scene was just like a whole new world for me.
Culture shock, yeah.
Oh my God. young kid, single. Yeah, it was. It was exciting. Probably the second or third time I went down there, a friend of mine went that had been fishing the Keys for quite a while. He said, Tim, and by then I'm like, I love South Texas because we're not developed. I'm old fashioned.
Yeah.
I love lonely places. I don't like all the high rise and all the concrete. I'm like going, this is great and I love it and I get it, but this isn't for me. I want to go home. Kind of a deal. Great place to visit. He said, Tim, till you get to the Keys, you can't appreciate this place. Long story short, he took me. We had just a little time before our flight left, so we took this rental racer down there. We took our rental racer down there and got as far as Key Largo. And I was like, oh man, I get this. I love this. I want to come back. And so the next year I went to the Miami Boat Show. I had a couple of 3 days after the boat show just to go to the Keys. And I'll never forget I drove all the way to Key West and he showed me around this and that, but I love the place. I love the place. It was so awesome, so special. It was almost like me stepping back in time in South Texas. It was that pristine. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm 100 miles from
Miami.
From Miami. Amen. That's right. But one real impression that I had was going to Bud and Mary's Marina.
I love Bud and Mary's Marina.
Hey, let me tell you. Oh my God, it was so special for me. But it made a real impression on me. I love the vibe there. I love the vibe at the marina. I love the boats at the marina. And back then, there was really no polling skiffs per se. Everything basically in that marina was a modified bass boat.
What year was this?
This was probably about 85.
Yeah, so 91, right? 91 was when the first whip ray hull gets built, or like 89 something. So
way before Hells Bay even thought about being Hells Bay. Yes, for sure. But 85 or 86 or so. And actually this was before that. But I love the vibe there. I love the boats there. I remember there was a boat called the Shy Poke. There was a boat called the Permit. There was a boat called the Silver King, which was a modified
the Silver King was the big one.
It was a Meso. It was a modified Meso. But most of these boats, long story short, there wasn't a semi-production polling skiff yet. So everybody was modifying bass boats, and everything had dead rise. So it wouldn't work in South Texas where I fished. It all drafted too much. But most of these guys were probably fishing oceanside tarpon. I'm sure the guys that were running into the glades and stuff had some shallower draft stuff. But there were very few that lacked dead rise. The Permit was one of them that lacked dead rise. It was in other words, you know what I mean by lacking dead rise. The V at the transom. It may have been 4, 5, 6 degrees at the transom. So it was flat and probably would work in our market. But anyway, a lot of inspiration came from that. I love the vibe. I love the area. But what it caused me to do was think about developing my own boat. And really, I think at the time, one of my reasons for wanting to develop my own boat, besides seeing some opportunity, was I wanted more fabrication. And I knew if I developed a boat, every one of them would have my fabrication on it. Crazy thought. Yeah, crazy thought. But anyway, I became very interested in that. And so I started drawing boats. I started sketching boats. I thought about how I wanted to build them. I considered aluminum for a while, but I couldn't cost effectively come up with the shape that I wanted from aluminum, a developable surface. And so I had a composites background. I had already, in my fabrication company, I had already built some patterns and molds for my pulling platform tops, for my leaning post tops. So I was already building some composite parts on a very small scale that were integral to my fabrication. Okay, and so there again, that was about 85 or 86. Well, I'd really been brainstorming on this boat idea, and not to get away from the subject, but I heard about a Meso. Meso was a pretty big manufacturer in Miami, South Florida, mainly doing offshore stuff. All the little 17 Meso, 19 Meso were great bay boats, even by South Texas standards. I heard that they built a polling boat that had a flush deck. And I'm thinking, flush deck? I mean, that's kind of been what I've been brainstorming about. And this boat is in South Padre Island. South Padre Island to me at the time was unknown. It was unknown to me. All of my experience was in the Rockport, Purchasing, Aransas Pass area, some Upper Lagoon, but mainly all in that area. And so, wow, a flush deck boat in South Padre Island. So I grabbed my now stepbrother Andy, Bill's son. I said, buddy, we're going to South Padre Island. Oh my God.
Pack up your bags. Let's
Oh
go.
man, loved it. Just driving through the chain ranch, all that Kennedy flavored country, I'm already in heaven. I mean, I love that stuff. And long story short, we heard that this boat was docked at Jim's Pier.
Who owned it?
I don't know who owned it, but there was a gentleman by the name of Leroy Summerlin that managed it. Who wound up being Captain Roy's on the island, the restaurant. Well, it was him. And I tell you, besides seeing that boat and looking at that boat and all that sort of stuff, the vibe hit me again. Right there, that hit me at Bud and Mary's.
When you saw like the boat sitting in the dock, or what exactly was the vibe you're talking about?
When I was sitting on that picnic table behind Jim's Pier, and those guys were coming in and out of there, and Leroy Summerlin was telling me about the big trout over in so-and-so Bay on the west side. Hey, I'm right
You're
here.
You're hooked.
I'm sorry. Stick a fork in me, I'm done.
Oh.
But anyway, I bring that up because, as you know, I've come to be very passionate about the Lower Lagoon, and so much that I don't advertise the place. I hate the place. It's nothing but muddy water. Everybody's mean. There's airboats everywhere. Wink, wink. Anyway, long story short, that was my introduction to the Lower Lagoon. Was right then and there. And Leroy Summerlin, I saw him at Skipper's funeral, remembered me. And I'd see him in the restaurant, you know, and this and that. But he was very, very kind to me. And I love that vibe.
Yeah.
It made a real impression on me. And so anyway, about that time, I come back, and of course I'm working too much. I work all the time, still fish a bunch, but I work a lot. And I had this idea, and I had all these sketches. And I know this is probably taking too much time to talk about all this stuff.
I'm eating it up. This is the Tim Clancey story. This is what I came here to do, and you're providing it.
So I come back, and I see some opportunity for this boat. I think an opportunity. Of course, you know, I have nothing about business or whatnot, but I think, okay, here's some opportunity for this boat. Something that isn't as, and I don't mean this the way that it sounds, but so many of the Texas boats, you know, I really picked up on this watching the boat shows with my Proline stuff. It's almost like if they're not rugged in appearance, they're not accepted. If they don't if they don't have a rugged interior, if they don't have a splattered finish, it's almost like,
I see where you're going now. Yes.
Hey, keep in mind this is back in 1985.
No, I see exactly where you're going now.
You have to step way back in time. We didn't have the boats that you are known for.
Yeah.
No, this is before any of that stuff came to Texas.
Yeah.
But I love the beauty. I love the soft lines. I loved all
the
that.
elegance, the panache.
Oh my God, no doubt. Yeah, hey, if they can both cook, marry the pretty one, right?
Yep.
You know, and so.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
And so I saw this opportunity. So I thought, I'm already hearing about pop stars. I knew about pop stars. There's a lot of guys running around out there in boats trying to do stuff they shouldn't be doing because the motors are way below the bottom of the boat. And so these pop stars, I don't like them. I hated them back then. But they're done by boats that really have no business being up there. You follow me? The props are below the bottom. I just saw an opportunity for a boat that would float and run shallower. And more importantly, get up shallow without doing damage, okay? And so I saw this opportunity for a different design. I saw this opportunity for a boat that truly had real dry storage, that truly had capacity on board, that maybe had a little bit nicer console, that was truly shallow draft, a little bit more refined. So I I was a fabricator. I built some boat hulls, had been involved in some boat construction from back in the Mr. Bass days and this and that. I somehow got led to a gentleman by the name of Jim Brown. Jim Brown, another mentor to me, lived in Austin. Jim Brown was VP of engineering for Dry Strong Boat Company in Austin and then New Braunfels. He had left there and went to work for a thermoforming plastics company.
Interesting.
Somehow, some way, I got introduced to Jim Brown. I said, Jim, here's what I want to do. Tim, I know nothing about fishing boats, but boy, do I know about boats. And boy, did Jim know about boats. Dry Strong in their heyday built 50 boats a day. 50 boats a day. And so Jim was my guy. I would drive to Austin one night a week, and I would take Jim all of my ideas. I would take him all of my sketches. I would take him photographs. I would take him all of my stuff, and he would draw and sketch all that stuff for me. And once I felt like we kind of started honed in on length and beam, dead rise angles, freeboard, styling, console, concept. I wanted this boat to be... I wade fish. I have to tell you, Andre, I'm a wade fisherman. Still to this day, I wade fish a lot. I don't spend a bunch of time on the foredeck of a point shift like you and a lot of my customers do. I love to wade fish, but I fish by myself a lot. And so it lends itself to that and keeping it fun for my wife, who's a great fisherman, who doesn't pull me around. But anyway, so took all these ideas to Jim. Long story short, we ended up, he drew this first boat for me. And so I come back to the shop. And in my shop, this lease space that I had, there was not a level place in the shop. I built this big stage out of lumber that was within 1/8 of an inch, front to back, left to right, that I built my first hull plug on. A hull plug is a hull pattern, but I built it as a real boat. And so it was all a Toomey, some fur, a lot of West epoxy. I had to build this boat to simulate an actual semi-production boat because that was going to be something I had to test and develop on the water. And so I built this first boat, and it went back and forth to the water once I was done 58 times, and there was a change made every time. I had a Spitz. I should get back from the water, have the motor off of it, and have it turned over in a matter of about 45 minutes. I had a Spitz on the bow, one that went where the jack plate was. Pick it up, you should roll it over. And that's from the racing stuff. That's all from developing these little race cars. And let me preface that a little in saying that I've had my grubby little hands on just about everything to date. Not as much then as I do now because I do a lot of repowers. I still build propellers for some boats other than NewWater boats for friends and stuff. And so I'm forced to have to run and fish a lot of times just about everything else that's out there. So I have a pretty good idea of how some of this stuff compares. Okay? So anyway, I built this running plug and back and forth to the water. It took me 10 years to do it. It took me 10 years to do this boat. And people say, man, why did it take you so long? Well, keep in mind, I did it all myself physically, but I had to fund it from all my fabrication. So some weeks I would get to spend 60 hours on it. Some weeks I wouldn't spend 6 hours on it.
What was the hardest year in that decade of building that boat?
Once I started the deck patterns, once I started
Jack patterns?
Deck, once I refined the running surface, once I knew what we were doing on the running surface, I generated hull tooling. Once I generated hull tooling, I built a composite hull inside of that hull tooling so that I could then build all of my internal components. I call them IGUs, internal glass units. The stringer system was all composite. The deck sole was all composite. The deck was all composite. An extremely sophisticated boat by today's standards. There's 24 molded components in it. But long story short, I had to build this hull tool, and then I built a hull part so I could tool all my components inside of to keep all my tolerances minimal. You keep minimal tolerances so you minimize adhesives to make the boats lightweight, okay? And so it took a lot of time. I had to learn a hell of a lot to do all this. And back then, I stick built everything. Everybody today, they draw all this stuff in a computer. They have a 5-axis router target. They build tooling. Generally, it doesn't go to the water. If it looked good in the computer, it's good enough for them. I'm pretty old school. I do everything this way still today.
Wow.
And it just takes a ton of time. I mean, there's the deck pattern. That's the deck pattern before it was sheathed. So anyway, it just took a lot of time. And besides all the...
Can you make sure to send me some of these?
Sure.
Like scan them and send them to me on email so I can post them?
Sure. But anyway, I mean, that all took a lot of time. And so, and I must say, I sort of struggle a little bit with OCD tendencies. I always have. And so, looking back, I spent way too much time on things that really didn't amount to
Should have been automated or something like that. Yeah.
Well, no, not necessarily automated, but like, for instance, sandpaper.
Have someone else do it.
I spent months studying micron sandpaper versus just wet or dry sandpaper because it would leave a wall scratch that would someday show up. I was a bit anal in this stuff. And so, but there again, I mean, it sort of laid the groundwork for the rest of the stuff that I developed going forward. So anyway, learned a lot the hard way.
Yeah. Wow. And that Avo set was the first one you built. Do you think that one came directly inspired from the permit you saw over at Buddy and Mary's?
Only the deck plan. Only the deck plan did. Nothing else. The deck plan did. I think the length and beam did. The Avo set was never developed to be a technical poling skiff.
Interesting.
Keep in mind, my roots are a wade fisherman. I'm a sight fisherman, but we drift fish a lot. We wade fish a lot. Where I come from, okay? It wasn't developed to be a poling skiff. However, it was all flush. It was all smooth. It lent itself to sight fishing. There was nothing else being built at the time on the Texas coast. And as you know, so much of our poling in South Texas is a controlled downwind drift.
Controlled is a good way to put it.
Yes, and so the boat does that. Is it a quiet boat? God, no. Very noisy, but very dry. But in that controlled downwind situation, it was quiet. I mean, so the point I'm trying to make is sight fishermen started to buy this boat. And there again, at some point, fly fishermen started to buy this boat. And don't want to get ahead of myself, but once this boat was done, I went, wow, I got this boat. I kept it secret behind some welding positions I had in the corner of my shop. I worked way too much at the time. My wife never saw me. Here's a photograph of my son, who's now 36. You know, he's 3 or 4 years old there. You know, and I'm working on the whole pattern for this boat. So, but I had to find a way to sell it. Okay, so I kind of kept it under wraps, and so I think I had decided at the time. This was about 1997 that I finally finished it. My fabrication company was going good by my standards. I had a couple of employees, you know, so I had a little bit of help there. But I was still in lease space. And I thought to myself, you know what? I think boats are sold through dealers. I think I need dealers. And so what I did was I took it to a dealer in Houston. And he said, you know, Tim, I love what you've done. Obviously, I had no experience. I wasn't manufacturing it yet. He said, Tim, why don't we put that boat in the Houston Boat Show? But you can't take it to the Houston Boat Show because
you're not part of the dealer network or something, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. But he said, you know what, we're going to put it in as if I'm a dealer. I'm not a dealer, but I'm going to let you put this boat in there. Well, we put the boat in the show, and it was very, very, very well received. And so what that did, it got the attention of a dealer. And this dealer who let it go in there was a bass boat guy. He knew nothing about saltwater boats. And so really his clientele wasn't my clientele. But what it did was it got me the attention of a guy named Meeks, M-E-K-K-S. John Meeks owned Meeks Marine, another hands-on guy. He came to me and said, Tim, I love your boat. I want to sell your boat. And so I signed that boat with Mies Marine and Chima.
Huh.
And so by then I drafted up a little dealer agreement thing. You had to have one on the showroom. You had to have one under order and all this sort of stuff. And so it was an evolutionary thing. I mean, it took a lot and a warranty and this and that. And the boat, how should I say this? Back at that time in 1997, that boat was state of the art. It was modified epoxy resin.
Mm-hmm.
It was all Davina cell foam core. It was all MMA adhesives. It was vacuum bags, components. It was all Tush Armor Toad Inmol coatings. I mean, it was stuff that was by Florida standards. It was there.
MMA, is that like a precursor to 3M?
No, it's not. MMA is a methyl methacrylate adhesive.
Okay.
It's an adhesive that when you put, see all those samples to your left?
Yeah.
Those are all laminate samples that I make. And so MMA is something where you take two laminates, you put them together with this adhesive to create a bond line. When you let that cure and you pull that bond line apart, the laminates fail. The bond line doesn't. It basically welds these laminates together. I think dentists may use methyl methacrylate adhesives. It's extremely expensive, but when you put things together with it, it's super lightweight if your bond lines are small, and bottom line is they don't come apart. But anyway, our stainless steel was all 316. By then, I was doing everything in-house. I had a canvas upholstery fabricator. Obviously, I was doing all the fabrication. So it gave me the ability to really create something that was really unique, without having to settle what the guy down the street could provide me.
Interesting.
I should build 15 cushions. If I didn't like the first 14, I should settle on number 15. It was very expensive, but yet it let us be very creative.
Yeah, there was no complacency. You could do everything to your own like specifications, desire, however you want to put it. That's a really good way to look at it.
Yeah. And so it allowed us the ability to do that. But anyway, so I signed Mies Marine. Throughout the development of that, I think I told you I went to several naval architects. I couldn't find anyone to really help me. Jim Brown ended up helping me a lot with basically just the warp bottom nature of the hull form. It was a warp bottom. By that I mean it had dead rise forward with very solid dead rise angles forward. Weight distribution was a big deal. So all these trips back and forth to the water was really just to develop some of that stuff before I ever drew the deck, where I wanted the fuel tank place, where the rod storage was going to be. All this sort of stuff was developed on the water. And so at that point, I also signed a dealer in San Benito, and let me look here at some of my notes. I signed the Sportsman. Rob Bucher.
Oh, down in the valley?
Yes, down in the valley.
Nice.
Yeah, Rob Bucher. And Rob represented us very, very well. Great guy, great businessman. But, so at that point I had these two dealers. I had Mies Marine, I had the Sportsman, and they were doing well for us. And I thought, you know what? I think I want to sign a dealer in Florida. So I took one of these boats behind my four-door Ford pickup with the yellow pages in the front seat. If we had cell phones, it may have been a flip phone or something. And so I took off with this boat to Florida. And I drove all the way to Key West from South Texas, pulling this boat. And man, I was just having to figure it out as I went. But I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I would be in the yellow pages looking at what dealers were in Homosassa and Fort Myers and this and that. And long story short, I ended up signing a guy who I really come to like. His name was Chuck Hawkins, and he had Fort Myers Marine. I signed Chuck in Fort Myers, and then I ended up signing a dealer in Tampa. His name was Jack McGahee. He had a company called Jack's Inner Bay Marine, and he sold a competing brand. And I'm not going to name names, they're all great boats, but he sold a competing brand. And he wound up just falling in love with the Avocet because it got him to some extremely remote areas on the west coast of Florida. And I don't know where his weekend home was, but I know he ran often to Boca Grande. You know that country better than me. But he was a very, very good spokesperson for us and sold quite a few boats for us there. So I had 4 dealers at the time. I had Jack's. I had Fort Myers Marine, Mason, the Sportsman. And they were doing really well for us. And so we rocked along there for a while. And it was going good. I didn't have a sales staff. I mean, it was still just me and whatnot. And somewhere along the way, I'm trying to remember what year all that was, 97, I was finished with it. So it wasn't too long after that. And during the development, I got married in 1989. Leslie and I got married. So there's a lot happened between, 87 and 97. But I started to get phone calls from owners, and they were like, the boat would have the wrong propeller on it. Or the dealer didn't take me to the water when I got my new boat, so they didn't know how to run it. My margins were very slim. The dealers knew I should only build so many boats, so their margins were really, really high, which is great. I want everybody to make money, and it wasn't Rob. Rob was great. He was probably the best guy I ever had. But I started to get these calls from these owners, and I was having to fill the calls. I was having to go take them to the water. I was having to put the right prop on the boat.
It was coming out of your pocket, even though you weren't paying for it. It was your time and your investment. I get it.
It was. It really was. And so at some point, I went to these dealers and really thanked them all. But I ended up just
you pulled and went local, or however you put it. You went independent. Yeah,
I did. Went independent, pulled it all back in, and started selling factory direct. And anyway, that's kind of what we did. And that Avocet, though, I mean, I think we ended up building 34 of them. Which
in that first, and how long?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I mean, I started producing them in 1997. So, I mean, that's been a long time ago that I introduced that first boat.
Yeah.
But, I made some great friends. One of the friends that I made was very instrumental in a lot of what I did was Chuck Nizer. And I'm going to call him Nizer in this podcast only because Chuck Skates and I had become friends.
Do you have any Chuck Skate stories?
Probably late in life. Probably after he kind of was diagnosed and this and that, I do. But I dip snuff, Chuck dip snuff. I mean, we had some commonality. We both love the sight fish and this and that. So, but he became a friend. But I bring this up only because when I talk about Nizer, it's not disrespectfully. It's only because I knew Chuck.
You know him as Nizer. I got it.
Yeah, that's right. And so Nizer and I became very good friends. In fact, as early as when I was building fabrication under my house, Chuck came to me, and I did a lot of work on Chuck's boats back in the day. Chuck, he was known for running airboat hulls with jet pumps on them.
Interesting.
And so I did a lot of work on Chuck's boats back then, and Chuck and I did a lot of stuff together. But Chuck was in an Avocet, one of the first guys to be in an Avocet, poled an Avocet. As a fly fishing guide, poled an Avocet. And Chuck came to me and said, Tim, I've got to have something lighter and simpler and this and that. And it caused me to really start brainstorming on a simpler boat that had the same hydrodynamics as the Avocet, but would pole easier, had less freeboard, didn't have the sail area. And so in about 99, I started development of my next model, and it wound up being the Curlew. And so in about 2001, I introduced the Curlew. And I think one of the first owners of the Curlew was probably, I don't know, probably Chuck Nizer, maybe Scott Sparrow. Scott Sparrow was probably one of my first owners in the Curlew. And as maybe a wade fishing platform, a downwind poling skiff. The Curlew is a cool little boat. I have one in my barn today. I do everything in it. Wound up being a really neat boat. I think we're currently working on hull number 167 in the Curlew, but it's a very light and simple little boat. And so, anyway, been building that boat for a long time. Nizer was in it. Ray Box had one. I mean, several people, and it sort of paved the way for me to have a relationship with the Scott Sparrows and the Chuck Nizers, and not to really get off talking about Chuck, but Chuck was just, he became a close friend of mine. And in fact, as I developed further stuff, getting more into like the Stilson stuff, I would even take my hull patterns down to Chuck and say, Chuck, let's fish it today. Early on, Chuck and I fished the Avocet together. I mean, we did a lot of stuff. We talked about birds together. Chuck helped me name the company. Chuck named the Avocet, and just a lot of stuff and a lot of friendships made over the years. But I mean, that's just kind of some of the stuff. And in 2003, Leslie and I built a plant here. I finally was able to move out of some of these space, and we built this
facility went right now.
Yeah, this facility went in, and by then I had a lot of people that came to know the performance of the curlew in about 2003.
Question: the curlew basically overshadowed the Avocet very quickly. People were kind of like, okay, I need this is like more of an upgrade, more so than like a secondary model, or how so did it affect the sales of the Avocet?
I quit marketing the Avocet because still today I can't charge enough money for that boat. There's 24 moldy components in it, and it takes too much of my time personally to build that boat. So I basically quit marketing that boat.
No kidding.
I can still build it today, but really had sort of gotten away from that and started to really market the curlew more.
Mm-hmm.
And people came to know the performance of the curlew, but they wanted additional carrying capacity. So Skipper Ray comes into my life, and Skipper says, Tim, he'd fished a curlew with a customer flying or something and really fell in love with it and said, Tim, I want one, but I want a bigger one. And so that really got me to thinking about a boat that would carry more weight, a boat that would become somewhat of a guide boat.
A wider boat.
Yeah, that's right. Not necessarily wider, but longer and quieter. Still float around ultra shallow, do it from a very environmentally friendly sense. And don't let me get and spend too much time on Skipper Ray, but I'd fished with lots of people at this point, and Chuck's one of the best, and Skipper's one of the best. And
yeah, it was something special.
And the reason I'm going to say this is because these guys were rod handlers and fishermen long before they had their first fly rod. Skipper Ray, and Chuck too. Skipper Ray, he'd bill fish you, he'd fly fish you, he'd bait fish you, he'd tarpon fish you, a stick. Skipper was a stick, and so we fished together some, and I did really appreciate him like I did Nizer, and so I'm going to do something for Skipper, and obviously therefore the market, and so I started development of the Ibis, and so started development of the Ibis, and I think in about 2004 I introduced the Ibis, and it's been really good for us. And then about 05 or 06, I had started fishing tournaments. I fished the FLW Redfish Tour. I fished the whole Western Division. The Eastern Division. And I had some great success. But I come to find out, fishing the FLW, it wasn't always most efficient to pole to these fish. They wouldn't let you wade fish. And so I started troll motoring some. And troll motors to me was foreign. But long story short, I also come to know that we weren't the fastest boat in the fleet. There's so many things that you do for shallow water performance that
hinder you 100% for speed.
Totally go against speed and low resistance. When's the last time you looked at a bass boat that the fuel tanks were in the back, the batteries in the back, it has a pad bottom? We want to minimize that weighted surface. All that stuff means it's supposed to float like this when it's static. So the pulling draft goes to hell. They don't float shallow. So I needed to come up with a way, fishing these tournaments, to still get really remote. By that I mean we did really well in these tournaments. We got very remote, and it was because we could get to some of these hidey holes where these bigger fish were at, and they weren't so pressured, and so on and so forth. But I needed to find a way to get faster. I wasn't willing to put a bigger motor on it because of what that would do to the LCG of the boat. You bet. And so by accident, I came up with a concept for Lama Vent.
This is what I wanted to talk about. This is something that caught my eye years ago when I was younger too.
You know, I won't talk negative about other boats because they're all great and they've all had their place in the evolution of these shallow water hull forms. But I was maybe testing a boat one day. I was maybe fishing a boat one day. And this boat had a tunnel that went stem to stern. It went plumb from the stem, plumb to the stern. And we were in a head sea, and we were introducing some water into this tunnel. and it would detach. It would detach. It would detach. And so, man,
Detach means like an air bubble in the thing, or what do you mean by detach?
Like here on the front of my race car, that water wouldn't stay laminar. It would not stay attached to that tunnel.
Oh, okay.
And it was because we were letting some air into the leading edge of this tunnel, okay?
Yep.
And I was like, oh, man. And so I laid in bed for several nights thinking about this concept and this and that. And I knew how much drag tunnels created because, let me start by saying, when I develop a boat, I fill that tunnel in. I fill it in with a sheet stop so I can determine, okay, I'm pulling this much water above the bottom, but what's the penalty? So what's the penalty with draft? Static draft. By that I mean, if I fill this tunnel up, how much higher is my boat going to float? Also, too, when I fill this tunnel up, how much faster or lower resistance is my boat going to be? So when I was developing tunnels, I was also looking to see how much I was penalized by how much drag has this thing created versus how much is there to be gained. So long story short, I ended up building a hull, and I built a hull, and I built it, and I put a clear, I don't speak well, I built a clear, C-L-E-A-R.
Clear.
I built a clear box over this tunnel, and I started to introduce air into the leading edge of this tunnel by different means. And so lots of trips back and forth to the water with this clear membrane over my tunnel. I developed what is now known today.
Was it filling the pocket? The whole thing, like we were talking about that sheet that was kind of like...
No, it was
just
not.
Filling the... Just covering the top?
It was
or the
not.
Bottom, sorry?
What it did, it gave me a clear hydrophobic way to develop lama vent. I should open up different air chambers at different places in this tunnel to see how it affected that laminar flow of water. Does that make sense?
Yes, but were you getting any like numerical data, or was it all just feel?
It wasn't feel. It was all besides feel. It was a lot of seat of the pants, but it was all captured. Obviously, I would write all this down. I still have all the notes today, but it was mainly speed. It was mainly speed and low resistance. It was how predictable should I make this laminar detachment. It was how predictable should I make this laminar reattachment. A lot of things were involved before I ever introduced it. And my mother, with her legal background, I mean, once I think I finally nailed it, she came to me and I said, Mom, I've got this idea. And I've had hundreds of ideas, and many of them we see out there today. I won't get off on the mini towers and the stakeout poles and all the other stuff. But she said, you know what? I want you to go see Ted Lee and Miller. Ted Lee was a friend or something, and he did patent attorneys. And I think my mom even helped me initially. But anyway, long story short, I went and got this patent granted for this lama vent technology, and it's, if you've never experienced it, it's actually really cool.
Never been in NewWater with lama vent.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool. Anyway, enough about lama vent. We did that, and so once I developed lama vent, I then generated new hull tooling for my IBIS because it didn't have a tunnel at the time, which really lent itself to an optimal lama vent technology. So I redeveloped the IBIS. I made the IBIS quieter. I did some things with the hull sections forward, which made it a quieter boat than it was initially. I eliminated the inversion up at the chine to make it a little bit quieter and this and that. So we did some things to improve it and whatnot. And we just delivered hull number 165 of the IBIS. So we brought along for quite a few years with some of these small... I'm a small company with some of these kind of handmade boats and this and that. And then I had something else happen to me at that time. This was in about 2006.
Okay.
I had someone who was a good friend. I've talked about in this podcast. He tied a Hells Bay blade shift to my dock in Rockport in about 2006. He said, Tim, I'm going to leave this boat with you. Just see what you think.
Interesting.
2006, he tied a Hells Bay blade shift to my dock. It had a little Mercury on it. It had the little two-stroke carbureted 25 Mercury that we've all had experience with. And I fished that boat for several days. And wow.
You're blown away?
I loved it.
Wow.
I loved it. For doing what when we're
Exactly what you're doing. Absolutely.
You bet. I loved it. I love this little boat, and there, I'm back to my roots. I'm back in the tiller shift, and I'm into this day. I love tiller boats, and so, but I love this little boat. I love this little boat and what it did. But there was a bunch of motor below the bottom, and I was already going to some really remote stuff in my boats that nobody else could get to. A lot of the stuff that I still walk to today. But that boat wouldn't get me there unless you were on the poles of these spots. It wouldn't even get me close. And so that was about 2006. I started really brainstorming about that concept that might work in this market. And so the boat pulled like a feather. It was whisper quiet, but it really wasn't where I wanted to go. I wanted something that was going to be more of a full-fledged poling skiff, something you should put a couple of big guys on and their gear and go 35, 40 miles an hour, have some range, have more ride quality, have a little bit more freeboard. So, I brainstormed about that for a long time, and that led me to build some prototypes, some one-off boats.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the Stilt came to be. I built a couple of one-offs, okay? And probably the most important thing that I did, and maybe the most detrimental thing I did, was lengthen beam. I did not want, as I started to build these boats wider, as they became beamier, the polability went to pot.
Mm-hmm.
It did. It went to pot. But I knew I needed carrying capacity, so I needed to get that from somewhere. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started to draw length into the design. And so the other major decision for me to make before developing this boat is forward sections. Forward sections are huge, okay? And there's basically two ways to make a boat quiet. You either submerge the chine, like you might do with a developable surface, like maybe a plywood boat, or like you might do with an aluminum boat. You bury the chine up forward, or you can build it out of conical sections. So I built two prototypes, one-off boats. I have photos of them. And so one of these boats, the one I wound up preferring, had conical sections. It was built more like a canoe than it was a boat that basically you would have this warp bottom, you would have this dead rise that goes all the way to the stem, and then you would just chop it off. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of very, very popular boats out there today that are built that way. And there's a couple of very popular boats that are built more of canoe sections forward. I felt like canoe sections forward were what I wanted to be. I found that to be superior. I found it to be easier to pull. Mm-hmm. I found it to be quieter. I had found it to have maybe to go through the water more efficiently. If you should imagine this canoe section is built more from convex sections than concave sections. B is more the convex sections. It's where you take this dead rise and you just chop it off. It's not efficient. It's not efficient. It turned very horsey, if you understand what I'm saying. It has some characteristics about turning that I did not like. The boat with conical sections, it healed much better in the turn. It didn't turn so flat, so I felt like it was safer. If there was a downside to my conical sections, to my canoe sections forward, I felt like the boat had the tendency to stick in the forward sections. What I mean by stick is that water would stay laminar. And so the way I dealt with that was I put some lift strakes underneath the running surface. So dynamically, when this boat is on plane, it would prevent that boat from sticking. So it would still allow that boat to turn and heel, no problem, but it wouldn't stick. That water wouldn't stay laminar to these sections up forward. And then the other thing we did, everyone does, was we put a big spray knocker up above the chine, up above what would be the chine of these tonal sections, and we turned it down an average of 5 to 7 degrees, this big generous spray knocker, which I think, by the way, has gotten out of hand. I think those spray knockers can get too big. And by too big, I mean they get ugly. I think these boats need to be pretty. Sorry, guys. But the surface area is what drives weight. I mean, look at my Willet. It weighs 240 pounds. It's all carbon fiber, but there's no surface there. Yeah. So I think you can get carried away with this stuff. So, not to get off on boat design ideas and this and that. This is just what I came to know. And so, in fact, I took one of these boats to Nizer. I said, Chuck, I've got this little boat. And by then, I had named this boat, which came to be the Stilt. I had named it the Long Skinny.
The Long Skinny.
The Long Skinny. And so I took it to Chuck, and he and I fished this boat. And I took it to a couple other people, and we fished the boat, and we poled the boat. And after that, I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to go ahead and call it good. I developed the tunnel that I wanted in it. I determined what that tunnel was in. And that tunnel is tiny, by the way. If you look at that, these people that say, can't have a tunnel on a boat, bullshit. I'm sorry, but bullshit.
Yeah.
And I say bullshit because I fill that tunnel. I have run that same haul farm without a tunnel. I know what it costs us. It's tiny. It's half the width of what the propeller is, but it's efficient and it works. You can't put a remote you can't put a remote pickup on a boat. You control that motor. That technology, Andre, it's been around for ages. Bob's that sells jack plates has sold a remote low water pickup for a long, long time. It's just like jet pumps. Horribly inefficient. It's just, that's old technology. It goes way, way back. I played with the jet pumps. I didn't play with the remote water pickups. Because why? Because that water has to get to that propeller. If I can pick up that water remotely, that's wonderful. It will cool that motor, but it does nothing for getting water to that propeller. So for me to get that propeller up high enough to run efficiently up above the bottom, how am I going to do it? There's no way to do it other than to building a propeller that is so god-awful, aggressively cupped, your performance goes to pot.
Yeah.
Your speed, your efficiency, your fuel economy goes to pot. And these are things that I felt I learned a long, long time ago, and that's been basically the basis for the Stilt and what is now obviously the Willet. And I know I've gotten ahead of myself some.
I don't think you have.
But that's the reason I chose to build a boat with the length to beam ratio of the Stilt. Is it out of the box? You damn right it's out of the box.
Oh, for sure.
It's not your typical 17 by 78 inch pulling shift. And so for that reason, I've been very blessed that I have some very intelligent people gravitate to the Stilt. Bill Hagen. Bill Hagen.
Yeah, Bill Hagen's a great person.
Bill's a hand. Bill's a hand. He's not just a great person. He's a hand. Scott Sparrow.
Scott and Ryan.
Chuck Nizer. The list goes on and on
Bud.
and on.
Oh, Bud doesn't have a Stilt, sorry.
Bud's been a NewWater owner forever. Bill would have a Stilt if he was still pulling boats. But I've been very blessed in that there were some people that went, I don't have to look like that guy who walks through the airport carrying his fly rod.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. There's I think something to that. And now I've seen some of these boats that are all that on the internet and this and that. I've started to see some of their designs get narrower, get lighter. So I think I may not see it. I think my son may see it.
Yeah.
Where some of this stuff starts to get more like some of what we've seen. Look at what the Ladesman back in the day poles around in these blades. Look at what Indians poles around back in the day. The long narrow concept has ride quality. It's extremely sea kindly. It's very comfortable. It gets up in nothing. It runs in nothing. It does it from a very, very, very environmentally friendly sense. And all these boats we build, I think I take all my owners to the water. Once their boats are done, I used to take them all. Now my son takes more and more of them, but I take them all to the water, And we talked about how to take care of them, how to maintain them, how to get the best out of the performance. But at the end of that, we talked about the resource. We talked about how to take care of it. We talked about the fact that just because it's supposed to do this, pole to a get-up hole, use a get-up hole, stay off the beach. We talked about Flatsworthy. I have a NewWater 101, I call it. And this was inspired by a presentation that I did at one of my owners' tournaments. I did owners' tournaments for years. I think they're going to come back. They were very, very popular. But I had this thing called Meet the Pros. And I would bring in guys like yourself. You would talk about podcast. You would talk about fly casting. You would talk about all the great things that you do. I would have Chuck. I would have someone from NOAA. I would have a fly tyer. Long story short, my owner said, Tim, we want you to do that on the water thing you did with us way back in the day. So it inspired me to develop my NewWater 101, which the reason I'm talking about this is because anyone who owns a NewWater boat that didn't get to buy it from me, but they bought it used, if you'll contact us, we'll send this to you. But at the end of all this, it talks about how to run the boat and own the boat and take care of the boat. We talked about the resource.
Wow.
And we talked briefly about Flatsworthy and what a great culture that's
promulgating.
You bet, for sure. All the work that Niger's done and all the stuff that I've been able to see in my lifetime.
Yeah.
You don't ever see it, Andre. You won't. You won't see it because it's no longer there.
Yeah.
It's no longer there. But to ensure that it's there for your kids, it's going to be tough.
Yep.
It's going to be tough. And I could talk for days about that. How we're going to get there, I don't have a clue. I hate to see some of the stuff I've seen happen. I'm not opposed to electric vehicles, and I'm all about space exploration. But when I see the city going in on South Bay, the lower lagoons become extremely precious to me. My wife's a sight fisherman. We love it down there. But I see all that's happening on South Bay. It breaks my heart because it's not just about South Bay. It's about those thousands and thousands of acres of wetland that feed South Bay.
Just to the west of South Bay, right?
All that is west of South Bay and southwest, plumb to the river of South Bay. All that stuff in a low tide, all those little creeks and guts and eddies that go up into that prairie, that is all so important to our ecosystem in that Lower Laguna Madre. I don't think you should have a biologist or a scientist today that realizes the scope of the impact that one little estuary has on the Lower Laguna Madre. And when I see them talking about proposing 20,000 gallons of treated water into it and this and that, it pisses me off.
Yeah.
Is there a thing I can do about it? Not a thing. Not a thing. But I want it to be known that South Bay is a grain of sand. It's a grain of sand that's going away.
Yeah.
That Lower Laguna Madre, I hear about the bridge. I get the fact that this world's getting too damn crowded and that everybody has a right to that resource. But just be damn careful about how you leave your footprint on that resource.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's not man-made.
Yeah.
We can't create another one of those.
Yeah, no. It's funny. Skipper Ray was when I did a podcast with him shortly before he passed, and he was the only person that I've heard. Maybe I remember it wrong, but to what I know, he was the only person I know who was actually advocating to close South Bay down and let it be a nursery, kind of like what we did with the bay system under Gaiman's Bridge.
Andre, for a long time, when the no motor zones came out and the running lanes and whatnot, we tried some of this in the Upper Lagoon and maybe around the Lighthouse Lakes and this and that. Initially, I was opposed to it. Anymore, I can't say I'm opposed to it done correctly. I've always been somewhat opposed to regulation, but I think done.
Yeah.
I think done with some real data and some real science. For instance, a new trout limit, I'm all in.
100%. 110%, yes.
I caught a 28-inch trout a week from, what's today?
April 29th.
Today's Wednesday?
30th. Yeah, Wednesday.
Yeah, a week from yesterday. Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I'm all for it. You just have to kind of be careful of when and how we do it. I mean, this resource that we have here, keep in mind, I've been on this water a long, long time. And so I've seen it a way that you can't imagine it was even seen. I mean, I can remember in Rockport, Max's Tackle Shop was downtown. The boat ramp was just a block away. On the weekend, you might see a dozen cars there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now every boat ramp in Aransas County on Saturday at 10 o'clock, you can't find a place to park. And so I guess where it's going, I don't know that when my grandkids are of age, that you won't have to draw a number to be on the water.
You think so?
I hate to say it, but when I see the trajectory that this pressure is on, I can't imagine how you should ever have an on-the-water experience that's even closely like what even you know today.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
Well, I mean, like, now that you're saying that and thinking about it, it almost feels like, this doesn't sound silly, but the housing market during COVID, where everyone was in a part of it, everyone was buying, everyone was investing, whatever, right after, actually, yeah. And it almost feels like in the coming years, and this is just thinking out loud after, like, literally spurred off what you just said, there may be kind of like a realization to all, like, this doesn't sound silly, but the guides who, may not be as specialized or as professional and are running 2 to 3 day trips and and whatever. And so I think that we may start to see some of them, kind of like subside. I mean, maybe I'm being too hopeful for it. But I do think that we're kind of in a similar situation. Call it like a cultural recession. But I don't know. Because it is tough. The guides are climbing, but at the end of the day, if you have too many guides and not enough clients, then eventually people are going to have to start finding other ways to make money. So I think it's more of a ticking time bomb. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's as negative in terms of, well, we're going to be overcrowded. I think that we're going to be in the worst of it. Mm-hmm. If anything, the worst of it probably happened a decade ago, give or take.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's tough, because I also see your point and I agree with what you're saying.
And like about the limits, I'm all for them. I come from that meat hall industry. My family, we love fresh fish, and I still keep some fish. I mean, I had fish last night, but I did it. But I think we're going to be okay in that regard. And I tell you why. I have seen it come from, man, that's just all these dead fish everywhere to where it is now. I've seen major progress in that area.
Yeah.
And you know what? If those guys that feel like, why would I hire a guy? I can only keep 3 trout, 3 reds, and this many drum, and this many flounder. I don't need that guy.
Yeah.
Go buy golf clubs. I mean, go do something else. We don't
go
want
spend that money at the grocery store.
Amen. If we have to replace that mindset, so be it.
That's what I like. I like that you're saying that. I completely agree. Completely agree.
I think I feel pretty confident about that. I also feel pretty confident in what the biologists are doing. I mean, even something as simple as the trail studies and whatnot that we do, that they'll stay in tune with the resource. I don't understand the child over 30. I'd like to talk to somebody that's really the brainchild behind that, but I think all in all, we're in pretty good shape, especially when you have people like Chuck Nizer, who's given so much of his life to carrying on what we all enjoy so much.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all. I don't think you're gonna believe this, but we're at the 2-hour mark flat right now.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry for that. And,
no, what are you apologizing for, Tim?
I mean, I should sit here and talk about boats, but I sound like a boat salesman. I have a couple other boats we build that I haven't talked about. One we're going to be building, but I promised I wouldn't talk like a boat salesman today.
Well, I mean, if you want to, so the way, like, 2 hours typically is like where I start to kind of cut it down. I have 2 questions that I like to ask before we end it, but before I do that, I always typically ask, is there anything that you want to have had said? Maybe something that we missed. We can kind of go over it. That way we can have it said.
Andre, there's really not. I mean, I haven't set out for this to be entertaining. I know that's not been entertaining.
It's been extremely entertaining. If you've seen my face, like, everything you're saying. So that's a lie.
Can I tell you a quick funny story?
Absolutely.
My wife, who runs this company, she lets me stop by every now and then and sign checks. But my wife runs this company, and my oldest son Tyler is now in here full time, and I'm so excited about Tyler and what he's able to do. That I'm not an internet guy. I mean, obviously he is, and this and that. But I have to tell a funny story about a phone call I got quite a while back. I have to run to town to buy some parts or get some supplies or something. And my wife, Leslie, calls me on the cell phone. She says, "Man, you're not going to believe this." And I thought, oh, my God, somebody cut their finger off. The forklift ran down the hill. It's in the highway. I said, "What is it, baby? What's going on?" "Yeah, I mean, it's in the showroom." I said, "Honey, who's in the showroom?" "George Strait's in the showroom. George Strait's in the showroom." And I got this real happy calm come over me because I'm thinking, man, she finally gets to spend some time with George Strait. I said, "Baby," all right, that's no problem. I said, "Man, you're fine. You got this and this and that." And long story short, I went the long way back to the plant. So she got to spend some time with George Strait. Long story short, he came in here inquiring about boats, and he and I wound up getting to spend some time together. He had me to his house in Rockport. He owns a Merritt.
Rick Hartman's been in that house also. He told me the story.
One of the boats I'm nutty about. He spent an hour going over his...
The one with the big it's a 70 foot, right? With the big, all the wooden pieces to it, yeah?
It's an 80. It's an 80
80 foot.
Yep. Name of it's Day Money. He probably has a 90 ordered by now. I know Roy Merritt's building a bigger one now, but long story short, I had to tell you that quick story about and when I delivered his boat, he asked me, he said, "Tim, do you mind delivering that boat to me at my house?" And so once we built his Ibis, I put the boat in at Little Bay. I'm idling up to, I knew where his house was. I'm idling up to his house. And Norma, his wife, she carries kind of a ditch bag out to the boat before I ever see Roy. She has this monster bag. And I'm like, man, where am I putting that thing at? Anyway, she comes out. I put this on there. I let her know that I was sober that morning. I hadn't drank my typical fifth of whiskey that morning. Just kidding. But anyway, I let her know that I love George. I felt blessed to do this. I was going to bring him back. Long story short, I spent the day on the boat with George. He gave me some great stories. Sung a song to me. He's a neat guy, extremely hardworking, obviously very, very talented, good fisherman. And anyway, got him home that day. And anyway, that was kind of a little story about that.
I've heard a bunch of really cool stories about George Strait over the years from different people.
Yeah, cool guy, very hardworking, and I'd like to say a friend to this day. And in fact, I have to somewhat end this by saying, I got news at 6 o'clock this morning that a mutual friend of ours, George's and mine, Roy Cooper, perished in a house fire about 7:30 last night. Anyway, enough about that. Andre, the other question you had for me.
The last two questions I ask. So the first thing is, looking back at everything you've done, everything you've built, everything you've created through this amazing story you've told me, is there anything you wish you would have done differently? Anything you wish you would have? And we've kind of touched a little bit on like little regrets, like I should have done this or whatever. But but anything that you haven't brought up or something like that?
Personally, sure, there's some things. Business-wise, there's a bunch of things. I probably would have grown the company much faster and gotten out and had more country and ranched more and spent more time with my oldest son, Tyler, when he was young, rather than spending so much time at work. But no, other than that, I mean, I'm extremely thankful. I've got a wonderful wife and great kids, and I love life and just very blessed to be here. And it's all good.
Good. All right. The last question is a pretty introspective one. As if you're talking to the next generation, maybe even think your kids when they were 14, 16, 18, whatever. What is a piece of advice you'd give them going forward into this industry, either the boat building industry, but more so just the outdoor industry as a whole?
Advice that I would give to someone maybe wanting to be in the outdoor industry?
It doesn't have to be boat building. It can be guiding. It can be writing. It can be photography. Point is the stuff that we share and what we're passionate about. If
you have the passion, get after it, because it takes passion. If you don't have it, If you think I just want to be that guy, forget it. It will never work. There's there's something to be said for that. Find something you love and you won't work a day. Hey, that's the marine industry. It's the outdoors industry. It's fishing. It's hunting. It's ranch management. It's growing white-tailed deer. That's what it's all about. If you're passionate about it, get after it. Be the best at it. Leave the resource better than you found it.
Well, I mean, you kept it so concise. I was expecting a 10-minute answer, but I'll take it.
Sorry.
I'm joking. I will take it, though. With that being said, Tim, I'm so glad we finally got to do this. I know it had been on your ass about it around this time last year. And I'm so glad that Bud Rowland made the introduction, that we actually got to get a chance to chat beforehand. And so maybe you kind of got an understanding of what I wanted to do more so, and now we're able to do it. But this has been an honor. Your name has been one that I've gotten multiple times to different folk, and it's cool that I can finally have this story also on this project, because it's been, like I said, I want to focus so much on the Texas people and what we've built and what we've brought to the table, or what our ingenuity. I did the same thing with Brian. I did the same thing with Corby. I did the same thing with Seth, like a bunch of different people. But at the end of the day, it's all one passion that we all share, and there's a bunch of different minds and a lot of ingenuity all going into the same essential niche, which is something quite incredible when you take a chance to look at it. So, I mean, again, thank you for letting this happen.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Andre. And I can't believe you and I have sat here for 2 hours.
2 hours and 8 minutes.
And never touched on something that's passionate. You and I are both passionate about. And that's big trout on the fly rod. But that's next time.
All right. Well,
I think what you're doing is really great. I do appreciate it. I think it will do a lot for the resource we both love.
Thank you so much, Tim. With that being said, all we got to do is get on out of here.
Adios.
Cool.